There was a time when marriage meant something sacred, when couples fought through storms together instead of walking away at the first sign of trouble. But what happened on Family Feud that afternoon would remind everyone watching why true love never goes out of style. When Robert and Eleanor Martinez walked onto that stage hand in hand, nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold. Harvey had seen thousands of contestants over his years hosting the show. But when this elderly couple revealed the truth behind their 65-year marriage, he did something he'd never done before. He stopped the show completely. And what happened next left 200 people in the audience in tears, including Steve himself. If you believe in the power of real love and commitment, you need to hear this story. And if you've ever doubted whether true partnership still exists in this world, stick around until the end. Because what you're about to discover will restore your faith in marriage, family, and the human spirit. Before we dive in, if you love stories that remind us of what really matters in life, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share real stories about real people who inspire us all. Robert Martinez was 83 years old. Eleanor, his wife of 65 years, was 82. They stood on the Family Feud stage wearing matching outfits that Eleanor had carefully picked out weeks before. Robert wore a navy blue cardigan that Eleanor had given him for his last birthday. She wore a floral dress with a pearl necklace that Robert had saved up for back in 1960. The couple had traveled all the way from their small apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. Their family had surprised them with the Family Feud experience as an early anniversary gift. Their 65th wedding anniversary was just 2 weeks away. But what the audience didn't know, what the producers didn't know, and what even their own family barely understood, was the real story behind how these two people had managed to stay together for 65 years. Robert had immigrated to the United States from Mexico in 1955 at the age of 17. He came with nothing but the clothes on his back and a promise he'd made to his mother before she passed away. Make something of yourself, she had told him. Find someone good and build a life worth living. He worked in construction for 2 years, sending money back to his younger siblings who were still in Mexico. He lived in a cramped apartment with 5 other workers, sleeping on a mattress on the floor. His hands became rough and calloused from the hard labor. But Robert never complained. This was the sacrifice his mother had made possible, and he wouldn't waste it. Then, in 1957, he met Eleanor. Eleanor was working as a waitress at a small diner where Robert and his co-workers would eat lunch. She was 19 years old, helping support her own family after her father had been injured in a factory accident. Her mother worked nights at a hospital, and Eleanor worked days at the diner. Between them, they barely made enough to keep their family housed and fed. Eleanor noticed Robert because he was different from the other men. He was quiet, respectful. He always said please and thank you. He never made her feel uncomfortable, the way some of the other customers did. And he left the biggest tips he could afford, even though she could tell money was tight for him too. For 3 months, Robert came to that diner every single day for lunch. And for 3 months, he tried to work up the courage to ask Eleanor on a date. Finally, one Friday afternoon, he did. His English wasn't perfect, but his sincerity was clear. Would you maybe want to see a movie with me? He asked, his voice shaking slightly. Eleanor smiled. I thought you'd never ask. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the local church. Eleanor wore a borrowed dress. Robert wore a suit he'd bought secondhand and had tailored to fit. They couldn't afford a honeymoon, so they spent their wedding night in Robert's tiny apartment, eating sandwiches and planning their future together. Robert had promised Eleanor a beautiful life. I don't have much now, he told her on their wedding night, but I promise you, I will work every day to give you everything you deserve. And he kept that promise. For 65 years, he kept that promise. But keeping that promise had required sacrifices that nobody knew about. Sacrifices that came with a price they were still paying even now. Harvey walked over to the Martinez family with his characteristic energy and warmth. All right, he said, clapping his hands together. We've got the Martinez family here. And I've got to tell you folks, when I saw in the notes that we have a couple who's been married for 65 years, I knew this was going to be special. The audience erupted in applause. Robert squeezed Eleanor's hand a little tighter. 65 years. Steve repeated, shaking his head in amazement. In this day and age, people consider themselves veterans if they make it to 5 years. You'd have been together for 65. That's longer than I've been alive. What's the secret? Robert looked at Eleanor. There was something in that look, something deep and profound that made Steve pause for just a moment. It was the kind of look that spoke of decades of shared experiences, of weathered storms, of a bond that went beyond words. We made a promise, Robert said simply, his voice still carrying a slight accent even after all these years in America. And we kept it. Steve nodded, sensing there was more to the story. But they had a game to play, so he moved on to introduce the rest of the family. The Martinez family consisted of Robert and Eleanor, their daughter Maria, who was 60, their son Thomas, who was 58, and their grandson Daniel, who was 25. It was supposed to be a joyful family celebration, a chance to create new memories together on national television. But as the game began, something else began to unfold. During the first round, when families introduced themselves and share a bit about their lives, Maria spoke up. "My parents are the strongest people I know," she said, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. "They've been through more than most people could imagine, and they've never given up on each other or on us." Steve noticed the emotion in her voice. He also noticed the way Eleanor reached over and gently touched her daughter's arm, as if to say, "It's okay. We're okay." As the game continued, more pieces of the story started to emerge. During a break between rounds, Thomas mentioned that his parents had worked multiple jobs their entire lives. Dad worked construction during the day, and as a janitor at night for 30 years, he said. Mom worked at the diner, then cleaned houses on weekends. They did whatever it took to give us a better life than they had. The audience murmured their appreciation, but Steve sensed there was something deeper going on. He'd been hosting this show long enough to know when a family was carrying something heavy. During the next round, when they were asked about family traditions, Eleanor spoke up. Her voice was soft but steady. "Every year on our anniversary, Robert takes me to the same restaurant where he proposed. We order the same meal we had that night, and we sit in the same booth if it's available." "That's beautiful," Steve said genuinely. "That's what I'm talking about. Keeping traditions alive." "We haven't missed a single year," Robert added. "Not one. Even when money was tight. Even when we were sick. We always found a way." There was something in the way he said it, something that suggested those times when money was tight and when they were sick were more serious than his words let on. As the game progressed, the Martinez family was doing well. They were tied with the opposing family, and the energy in the room was high. But Steve kept noticing little things. The way Robert moved slowly, carefully. The way Eleanor would occasionally close her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. The way their children would glance at them with a mixture of pride and concern. During the final round, something happened that changed everything. The category was things you sacrifice for the people you love. It was one of those poignant Family Feud questions that went beyond just being funny, that actually made people think. Robert buzzed in first. "Your dreams," he said quietly. Steve looked at him. There was something in Robert's eyes, something that spoke of a very specific, very personal sacrifice. "Your dreams," Steve repeated. He turned to the board. "Show me your dreams." It was the number one answer. The audience cheered. But Robert wasn't smiling like you'd expect. He was just looking at Eleanor, and she was looking back at him with tears beginning to form in her eyes. Steve noticed. He'd seen a lot of emotional moments on this show, but this felt different. "You okay, Mr. Martinez?" Steve asked gently. Robert nodded, but Eleanor, standing next to him, reached over and took both of his hands in hers. She turned to face him fully, ignoring the cameras, the audience, everything except her husband of 65 years. "Tell them," she said softly. "It's time. Tell them the truth." Steve Harvey held up his hand, signaling to his producers. "Hold on," he said. "Hold on, everybody. Something's happening here." He walked closer to Robert and Eleanor. "Mistress Martinez, what truth are we talking about?" The studio had gone completely quiet. Everyone sensed that something profound was about to happen. Eleanor turned to face the audience, still holding Robert's hands. Her voice was stronger now, empowered by 65 years of love and determination. "When people ask us the secret to a long marriage, they want simple answers. They want us to say never go to bed angry or always say I love you. And those things are true, they matter, but they're not the whole truth." She paused, looking at Robert, who nodded for her to continue. "The truth is that 65 years ago, when Robert and I got married, we didn't just promise to love each other. We made a bigger promise. We promised to build a life together, no matter what it cost us. And it cost us everything." Steve stood quietly, letting her speak. 3 years after we got married," Eleanor continued, "I got pregnant with Maria. We were so happy, but I had complications during the pregnancy. The medical bills were enormous. We had no insurance. Robert was working 2 jobs already, but it wasn't enough." Robert picked up the story, his voice heavy with old pain. "I had been saving money. For years, even before I met Eleanor, I had been saving. I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to become an engineer. That was my dream, the thing my mother wanted for me. But when Eleanor got sick, when the hospital bills came, I had to make a choice. He used all his savings to pay for my medical care, Eleanor said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Every penny he'd saved for his education, gone in an instant. And he never said a word about it. He just did it. The audience was completely silent. Some people were already crying. But that wasn't the end, Robert continued. 2 years later, when Eleanor was pregnant with Thomas, the same thing happened again. More complications, more bills. And this time, I didn't have savings. So I took on a third job. I worked construction during the day, cleaned offices at night, and on weekends, I worked at a warehouse. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. For 5 years, Eleanor added, he worked like that. For 5 years, I barely saw my husband. He would come home and collapse, wake up and leave again. Our children grew up barely knowing their father because he was always working to keep us afloat. Steve Harvey had his hand over his mouth, listening intently. And then, Robert said, when the kids were in school, Eleanor got sick again. Really sick. Cancer. A collective gasp came from the audience. The treatment was expensive, Eleanor said. So expensive. We had been trying to save again, trying to finally get ahead. We wanted to buy a house, give our children a real home instead of the small apartment we'd been renting. But all that money, everything we'd saved, went to my treatment. I sold my truck, Robert added. I sold my tools. I sold everything we had that was worth anything. And I took out loans. Loans that took us 20 years to pay off. 20 years, Eleanor repeated. We finally paid off the last of my medical debt 5 years ago. We were 77 and 78 years old, still paying for medical care I received when I was 35. The weight of this revelation hung in the air. Steve Harvey, a man known for his quick wit and humor, was speechless. But Eleanor wasn't finished. People think the secret to a long marriage is finding the right person, she said. And maybe that's part of it. But the real secret, the truth that nobody wants to hear, is that marriage is sacrifice. Real sacrifice. Not the romantic kind you see in movies. The kind that costs you your dreams. The kind that costs you your sleep. The kind that costs you decades of financial security. Robert turned to face Eleanor fully, and now there were tears in his eyes too. But here's the other truth, he said, his voice strong despite the tears. I would do it all again. Every single sacrifice, every single sleepless night, every single dream I gave up. I would do it all again without hesitation. Because Eleanor is worth it. Our family is worth it. This life we built together is worth it. Eleanor was crying openly now. And that's why we've been married 65 years. Not because it was easy. Not because we didn't have doubts or struggles or moments where we didn't know how we'd make it through. But because we decided that our promise to each other was more important than our comfort. Our family was more important than our individual dreams. Steve Harvey walked closer to them, and there were tears running down his face too. Hold on, he said to his producers again. Just hold on. He stood in front of Robert and Eleanor, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. In all my years doing this show, he said, I have never heard anything like this. You two, you represent something that I think a lot of us have forgotten. You represent real commitment, real love, the kind of love that doesn't quit when things get hard. The kind of love that says, I will sacrifice everything, I have to make sure you're okay. He turned to the audience. We live in a time where people give up on marriages because the other person doesn't load the dishwasher right. And here we have to people who gave up their entire futures, their dreams, their financial security, everything, for each other and for their family. And they've never complained. They've never given up. They've been married for 65 years, and they would do it all again. The audience erupted in applause, but Steve held up his hand again. No, wait, I'm not done. He turned back to Robert and Eleanor. You have taught me something today. You've taught all of us something. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even care about the game right now. What you've shared is worth more than any prize we could give you. He paused, then made a decision. Here's what we're going to do. The show will make a donation in your name to help other families struggling with medical debt. Because your story shouldn't be the norm. Families shouldn't have to choose between health care and their dreams. But until we fix that system, we can help where we can. The audience cheered again, louder this time. And Steve continued, I want you to know that you've changed this show today. You've changed me. You've reminded all of us what really matters. What happened next was something nobody expected. Maria, their daughter, stepped forward. Steve, if I can say something. He nodded. My parents never told us the full extent of their sacrifices, Maria said. We knew they worked hard. We knew money was tight, but they never made us feel like we were a burden. They never made us feel like their sacrifices were something we should feel guilty about. Instead, they taught us the value of hard work, the importance of education, and the power of love and commitment. Thomas joined his sister. Because of their sacrifices, my sister and I were able to go to college. We were the first in our family to graduate from university. And now, my son Daniel," he gestured to his son standing next to him, "is in medical school. He's going to be a doctor." The audience cheered, and Steve's face broke into a huge smile through his tears. "That's what I'm talking about," Steve said. "That's the legacy. Your sacrifices didn't just affect your lives. They changed your children's lives, and now they're changing your grandchildren's lives. That's generational impact right there." Daniel, the grandson, spoke up for the first time. His voice was shaking with emotion. "I'm studying to be a doctor because of what happened to my grandmother. I'm going to specialize in oncology. And I'm going to spend my career making sure that families like ours don't have to make the choices my grandparents made. That's my promise to them." Eleanor and Robert were both crying now, but they were smiling too. This was the first time they'd heard their grandson articulate this dream so clearly. Harvey walked over to Daniel and put his hand on his shoulder. "Young man, you just made your grandparents' 65 years of sacrifice worth every single moment. You understand that? You just validated every sleepless night, every missed dinner, every deferred dream. Because you're taking their sacrifice and turning it into something that will help countless other families." He turned back to the camera. "This is what Family Feud is really about, folks. Yes, we have fun. Yes, we play games. But every now and then, we get to witness something truly special. We get to see what the human spirit is really capable of when people love each other the way they were meant to love." The game resumed, but it almost felt secondary now. The Martinez family won their round, but nobody really cared about the score. The real victory had already been won. After the show ended, Harvey did something else he'd never done before. He invited the Martinez family to have dinner with him and his own family. He wanted his children to meet Robert and Eleanor, to hear their story, to understand what real commitment looked like. Over dinner that night, Steve asked them the question that had been on his mind since their revelation. "In 65 years, did you ever come close to giving up? Was there ever a moment where you thought, I can't do this anymore?" Robert and Eleanor looked at each other, and Eleanor answered. "Many times," she said honestly. "There were nights when the bills were piled up on the table, when I was sick, when Robert was exhausted from working 3 jobs, when our children needed things we couldn't afford to give them. There were nights when we sat at that table and cried together because we didn't know how we were going to make it through another month." But Robert continued, "We had a rule. We could cry together, we could be scared together, we could be overwhelmed together. But we couldn't give up. That was the one thing we promised each other we would never do. We would face everything together, and we would figure it out together." "And we did," Eleanor finished. "Every single time, we found a way. Sometimes it wasn't the way we wanted. Sometimes it required more sacrifice. But we found a way because we were in it together." Steve nodded slowly, taking it all in. "You know what you'd have given people today? Hope. In a world where half of all marriages end in divorce, where people swipe left at the first sign of imperfection, you've shown us that real love still exists. That real commitment is still possible. That choosing to stay, choosing to sacrifice, choosing to honor your promises, that actually means something." The story of Robert and Eleanor Martinez didn't end that night. After the episode aired, it went viral. Millions of people watched the video of their revelation. Comments poured in from around the world. "This is what marriage is supposed to be," one person wrote. "Not the fairy tale version we see in movies, but the real version, where do people choose each other every single day." "I was about to give up on my marriage over something stupid," another person commented. "This video saved my relationship. If they could stay together through all of that, I can work through our problems. My grandparents were married for 60 years, and I never understood it," someone else wrote. "Now I do. It's not that they didn't have problems. It's that they chose to face their problems together instead of running away." The video became a teaching tool. Marriage counselors used it in sessions. Churches played it in marriage preparation courses. Schools used it to teach about perseverance and family values. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from a young couple in Ohio. They had been planning their wedding when medical bills from an unexpected illness threatened to derail everything. They were considering postponing the wedding, maybe even calling it off. The stress was too much. Then they watched Robert and Eleanor's story. They got married as planned, in a simple ceremony they could afford. And on their wedding day, they made a promise to each other, inspired by the Martinez family: "We will face everything together, and we will never give up." They sent Robert and Eleanor a letter, telling them how their story had changed their lives. Eleanor kept that letter in her purse, reading it whenever she needed a reminder that their sacrifices had mattered. 6 months after the Family Feud episode aired, Robert and Eleanor celebrated their 65th wedding anniversary. Their family surprised them with a party, and the restaurant where Robert had proposed decades earlier donated the venue and the meal. But the biggest surprise came when Steve Harvey himself showed up. "I couldn't miss this," he said, embracing them both. "You two changed my life. You changed how I think about marriage, about commitment, about what really matters. The least I could do is show up to celebrate 65 years of the real thing." During his toast, Steve said something that captured what everyone in the room was feeling. Robert and Eleanor didn't just stay married for 65 years. They showed us what marriage really means. They showed us that love isn't a feeling that comes and goes. It's a choice you make every single day. It's waking up and saying, "I choose you," even when things are hard. Especially when things are hard. They sacrificed their dreams, but in doing so, they built something better than any individual dream could have been. They built a legacy of love, commitment, and family that will last for generations. Robert stood up to respond, Eleanor's hand in his as always. "People keep saying we sacrificed our dreams," he said. "But that's not how we see it. My dream was to have a good life, to honor my mother's wish for me to make something of myself. And I did. I made a family. I made a partnership with the woman I love. I made a life worth living. Yes, I gave up the idea of being an engineer. But I built something better. I built a family that will change the world. My grandson is going to be a doctor. My daughter is a teacher who impacts hundreds of children every year. My son is a business owner who employs 30 people and treats them with dignity and respect. That's better than any building I could have designed as an engineer." Eleanor added, "And my dream was to be loved and to love someone completely. To build a family. To make a difference. And I did all of that. Yes, we struggled. Yes, we sacrificed. But we also lived. We loved. We raised children who are good people. We built a marriage that has meaning. When I look back on 65 years, I don't see what we gave up. I see what we gained. There wasn't a dry eye in the room." The Martinez story reminds us of a fundamental truth that modern society often forgets. The things worth having in life rarely come easy. Real love, lasting commitment, strong families, these things require sacrifice. They require us to think beyond ourselves, to consider something bigger than our individual comfort or desires. But here's the beautiful part, the part that Robert and Eleanor prove. Those sacrifices, when made with love and for the right reasons, don't diminish us. They make us stronger. They give our lives meaning. They create legacies that last far beyond our own lifetimes. Today, Robert is 84 and Eleanor is 83. They still live in their small apartment in Phoenix. They still hold hands wherever they go. They still celebrate their anniversary at the same restaurant every year. And they still believe that the best decision they ever made was to promise themselves to each other 66 years ago, and to keep that promise no matter what it cost. Their story isn't just about marriage. It's about what we value as a society. It's about whether we're willing to commit to something bigger than ourselves. It's about choosing love, even when love is difficult, especially when love is difficult. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about real people, real love, and real life. Because in a world full of fake perfection, we need more real stories like Robert and Eleanor's. Stories that remind us what truly matters. Stories that show us that the best things in life are worth fighting for. The truth behind Robert and Eleanor Martinez's 65-year marriage wasn't a secret formula or a clever trick. It was simply this: they chose each other every single day for 65 years. Through poverty and illness, through exhaustion and disappointment, through sacrifices big and small, they chose each other. And in doing so, they showed us all what real love looks like.